This is Canada, almost 10 million square kilometers, the second largest country on Earth. 40 million people, nearly all of them living in this narrow band along the southern edge. The rest of the country, from that line to the Arctic, is almost completely empty. This is Australia, 7.5 million square kilometers, 27 million people, almost all of them living in a thin ring around the coast. Everything inland, nearly the entire continent, is empty. Two different shapes, the same story. Which country digs minerals and fossil fuels out of the ground and ships them to the rest of the world? Which country is almost entirely empty and still has a housing crisis in its biggest cities? Which country has less than 5% of its land that people can actually live on? Both. Every time. These two countries share no border, no history, no proximity. They are separated by more open ocean than any two countries on Earth. And yet they ended up identical. How? Pillar 1, the empty interior. Look at Canada and Australia at the same scale and the image is almost identical. A vast, dark interior, a populated coastal fringe, almost nothing in between. But before we explain why, it is worth pausing on just how empty almost nothing actually means. In Australia, the Shire of East Pilbara in Western Australia is roughly the same size as Japan. Its population is around 10,000 people, and half of them live in a single mining town. There is a privately owned cattle station in South Australia, Anna Creek, that is larger than the entire country of Israel. It has 8 full-time employees and about 10,000 cows. The pastoral unincorporated area of South Australia is the size of France. It has 3,750 residents. In Canada, the Canadian Shield, the ancient rock core that defines the country's interior, covers nearly half of Canada's total land area. It is the largest mass of exposed Precambrian rock anywhere on the planet. The largest human settlement on the entire shield is Sudbury, Ontario, with a population of 166,000 people. That is the biggest city on a landmass half the size of Europe. These are not edge cases. They describe the normal condition of most of both countries. Now the question is, why? And the answer for each country is different, but the outcome is identical. The Canadian Shield is Precambrian bedrock, in some places over 4 billion years old. From roughly 2.6 million years ago to about 12,000 years ago, glaciers advanced across it and scraped the land almost completely bare. Everything that had accumulated on the surface, soil, minerals, organic matter, was pushed south and southwest. What remained was exposed jagged bedrock with at best a thin skin of topsoil above it. You could not farm it at scale. Building infrastructure across it is prohibitively expensive because everything must be drilled or blasted into the rock. When you overlay a map of the Canadian Shield against a map of Canada's population density, the match is nearly perfect. Almost every Canadian lives at the shield's edge or beyond it, not within it. The glaciers did leave one thing behind: the soil they stripped from the shield. It landed further south in the prairies, glacial lakebed sediments that became some of the deepest agricultural soils on Earth, up to 3 meters of topsoil in places. The same event that made half of Canada uninhabitable created some of the most productive farmland on the planet just further south. Canada won and lost the same geological lottery in the same event.
That is Canada's story. One geological event determined where every Canadian would live. Now look at Australia. The same empty map, but no ice sheet ever reached the Australian interior.
The easy answer is it's a desert, but that's only a quarter of the explanation. Start with the Great Dividing Range, Australia's longest mountain chain running down the entire eastern coastline. It creates a rain shadow across most of the continent. Moisture blowing in from the Pacific dumps its rainfall on the narrow coastal strip between the mountains and the sea, then continues west as dry air. The interior never gets it. The problem is those mountains aren't even impressive by global standards. Australia has the lowest average elevation of any continent on Earth. Mount Kosciuszko, the highest point in mainland Australia, reaches only 2,228 meters. The highest point of every other inhabited continent is at least double that. Few mountains means few mechanisms to force air upward where it can cool into rain. Then add the Southern Ocean. Cold currents running up the western side of the continent suppress evaporation, which means fewer clouds form over Western Australia in the first place. Then add the Tropic of Capricorn, which runs straight through Australia's midsection, placing most of the country within the subtropical high-pressure belt that simultaneously warms and dries the air, actively working against rainfall. The result is the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Around 35% of Australia is outright desert or near desert, but there is one more layer that makes Australia's water problem stranger than any map suggests. Northern Australia gets rain. Darwin receives around 1,800 millimeters per year, nearly triple London's annual rainfall, but almost all of it falls in 4 months. Tropical cyclones make the inland rainfall pattern violently erratic. One town in northern Australia recorded 740 millimeters of rain in a single day in 1898, more than London receives all year. The same town received just 4 millimeters in the entire year of 1924. You cannot build agriculture on that kind of variance. The consequence is visible in Australia's river systems. The Murray-Darling Basin, Australia's largest and most important river network, covering nearly 1 million square kilometers, carries an average annual flow of around 24,000 gigaliters. The Mississippi Basin carries around 530,000 gigaliters. Australia's greatest river system moves less than 5% of the water that America's does. It is the agricultural heartland of the country, and it is perpetually underfunded by rainfall. These 4 systems, the rain shadow, the low elevation, the southern ocean currents, the subtropical pressure belt, converge to produce the same map every time. Rainfall follows the coast, population follows rainfall, and the interior stays dark. Different geologic and climatic histories, the same result. 2 enormous countries where almost nobody can live in the middle, and that shared constraint produces everything else that follows. Pillar 2. Why they both sell rocks for a living. Ancient geological cores are not just inhospitable to human settlement, they are also, almost without exception, where the world's richest mineral deposits concentrate. Billions of years of geological processes sort, compress, and surface valuable minerals in ways that younger, more geologically active landscapes simply do not. Canada's shield holds some of the largest nickel, gold, uranium, and potash reserves on the planet. Australia's Creighton sits on top of approximately 25% of the world's known iron ore reserves, the second largest lithium reserves on Earth, and some of the most productive gold fields ever discovered. These are not resources that governments found through clever prospecting. They are resources that geology produced over time frames that make human history look like an afterthought. Both countries arrived at the same economic model for the same reason. When your most accessible natural endowment is buried mineral wealth, and when your geography gives you deep water ports to ship it, you become a commodity exporter. Not because you chose to, because the rock beneath you left you little alternative. There is a secondary consequence that rarely gets discussed. When viable land is this constrained and economic activity concentrates into a small number of coastal cities, markets compress. Banking, telecoms, airlines, grocery retail, in both Canada and Australia, these sectors are dominated by 2 or 3 players. Geographic concentration produces market concentration. Consumers in both countries pay prices that reflect this and have for generations. Pillar 3. Why their cities are unaffordable despite having infinite land. Both countries are enormous. Canada is the second largest country on Earth by area. Australia is the 6th, and yet both have housing crises so severe that their major cities rank consistently among the least affordable on the planet. This seems like a paradox until you understand what livable land actually means. Total land area and habitable land area are not the same thing. In Canada, the corridor that can support dense, temperate, economically connected settlement is essentially 2 strips: the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence lowlands. and the lower mainland of British Columbia. That is roughly 3 to 4% of Canada's total land area. In Australia, it is the southeast coast running from Brisbane through Sydney and Melbourne to Adelaide, plus a separate pocket around Perth, a similar fraction of total national area. The interior of Canada is not an overflow valve. The outback is not a housing solution. When you funnel tens of millions of people plus sustained immigration flows into a geographic bottleneck, prices spike. Not because immigration is inherently inflationary, not because planning policy failed, but because the boundaries of livable land are drawn by climate and geology, not by government. Sydney cannot be moved 500 kilometers inland. Vancouver cannot expand into the Shield. No policy can fix a geographic constraint. Policy can manage it, aggravate it, or partially compensate for it, but the structural pressure on housing in both countries originates in the same place. An enormous country with a tiny livable fringe and a growing population that has nowhere else to go. You have now seen 3 independent lines of evidence pointing to the same root cause: the empty interior written in geology, the commodity economy written in mineral wealth, the unaffordable cities written in the constraints of habitable land. Every major structural feature these countries share traces back to the same source. The British did not build 2 identical countries, geography did. Britain just found them both and planted a flag. If geography explains why Canada and Australia are similar, it also explains why they are not identical. And the most important difference between them is not cultural or historical, it is locational. Canada shares an 8,891 kilometer land border with the most powerful economy in human history. Australia is separated from the nearest major economy by over 14,000 kilometers of open ocean. That difference in proximity is not neutral. It functions like a gravitational field on one side and like a moat on the other. Talent migrates toward opportunity, and in North America, the largest concentration of capital, technology investment, and market scale sits directly to the south. Canadian professionals, founders, and engineers face a continuous pull that their Australian counterparts simply do not experience in the same way. BlackBerry is the clearest illustration available. In 2009, BlackBerry held over 50% of the US smartphone market. It was the dominant mobile platform on Earth. Within 3 years, it was in freefall, outcompeted by firms that could deploy capital at a scale Canadian markets could not match and could iterate inside an ecosystem that Canadian geography placed just outside easy reach. BlackBerry did not fail because Canada lacked talent. It failed, at least partly, because Canada's most valuable technology company was building inside a gravitational field that favored its competitors. Australia had no American neighbor. 14,000 kilometers of ocean is not a land border. BHP, Commonwealth Bank, Macquarie, these institutions were never at risk of being quietly absorbed by a larger economy sitting next door. The capital stayed. The institutional wealth accumulated. Australia's median household wealth today sits at approximately $268,000 USD. Canada sits at approximately $152,000 USD. That approximately $116,000 gap has a geographic explanation. Isolation was protective, proximity was extractive. The glaciation asymmetry. There is one more divergence that geography planted at the foundation of each country, and it will matter more in the coming decades than it has in any previous generation. Canada was buried under ice, repeatedly and brutally, but glaciation, for all the destruction it caused to Canada's interior, left behind something extraordinary. The retreating ice carved the Great Lakes, which today hold approximately 21% of Earth's surface fresh water. It deposited glacial lakebed sediments across the prairies that became some of the deepest and most productive agricultural soils on Earth, in places reaching 3 meters of topsoil. Canada has a hidden agricultural superpower, a water reserve of almost incomprehensible scale, built entirely by Ice Age geology. Australia received none of this. Its soils are ancient and leached. Its rivers are seasonal. The Murray-Darling Basin, which functions as Australia's agricultural heartland and covers nearly 1 million square kilometers, is chronically water stressed. In a country that was never glaciated, where the land was left undisturbed long enough for every nutrient to be drawn downward and away, water is a permanent structural vulnerability. One country was buried under ice, which destroyed the surface and then gifted it. The other was left untouched, which meant ancient land kept its ancient flaws. Both outcomes were written before either country existed. For most of the 20th century, being a commodity exporter was a secondary role. The real economic action was in manufacturing, finance, and technology. Canada and Australia occupied a supporting position in the global economy, supplying inputs to countries that turned those inputs into finished products and, in doing so, captured most of the value. That calculus is changing. The inputs the 21st century runs on are different from the inputs the 20th century needed. Lithium for electric vehicle batteries, uranium for the nuclear energy renaissance, rare earth elements for clean energy infrastructure, fresh water as a geopolitical resource in a world where aquifers are collapsing and rainfall patterns are shifting. Australia holds the world's largest uranium reserves, accounting for approximately 28% of the global total. Canada holds the third largest, with the world's richest high-grade deposits, approximately 10% of the global total. Australia is the world's largest lithium producer, sitting on reserves that rank among the two largest on Earth. Global lithium demand is projected to grow roughly 40 times over by 2040 under high demand scenarios as electric vehicle adoption accelerates. Both countries rank in the global top 5 for rare earth potential, and Canada holds the world's third largest freshwater reserves, a resource that most of the planet will increasingly lack. Two countries that spent a century exporting iron and oil to fuel other people's industrialization are now sitting on the critical minerals that power electric vehicles, clean energy grids, and next-generation technology. The geographic template has not changed. The rock is the same rock it has always been, but what the world needs from that rock has shifted in ways that could rewrite both countries' positions in the global economy. The geography that once defined them as commodity appendages to wealthier industrial powers may be the same geography that places them at the center of what comes next. Both countries are asking the same question right now. Can you rebuild a modern, innovative economy on top of a geographic template designed by deep time to extract and export? Share in the comments. Geography shapes more than borders. It shapes economies, cities, and the futures of entire countries. Which place gets explained next? If you want to find out, subscribe to TruGeo. Thanks for watching it, and see you in the next one.